So if you want to talk about trauma is essentially a core idea. It could be positive or negative, that is seeded or planted at a time of emotional intensity. So like if you succeed in the football team at multiple times and there's all this cheering and stuff, and the idea is planted there that you're actually worth something really valuable, then you've been positively traumatized to believe something, right? And so negative trauma would be in the other way. And so you put somebody, for instance, in a hospital who is in pain, chronic pain all the time, and they're eating hospital food and they're uncomfortable and they're on the bed and they're around all these things, and they're given this sense that this little button here will increase the amount of relief that I get. The chemical dependency is the link that their mind is making. I'm in this dire strait. This is my only lifeline. So the opioid addictions and all that other stuff it's not a genetic thing. Genes themselves, the expression of genes change moment by moment. They are not some fixed thing that one time turn on and then they never turn off again. The expressions of genes have been measured all over the place. Dr. Joe Dispenza has done a lot of work on this. All over the place. You can turn on and off gene expression just by a single thought. And so if maintained over time, that's going to change the body's habit of which genes are on. But when we're dealing with genes are wrapped in a protein, and in order for them to be turned on and off, that has to open up. So what is it that opens up proteins? And now we're talking about thoughts and psychology.
So there's your prayer, there's your affirmations, there's your manifesting right there. It's creating environments for those opportunities to open up. And if they happen or not is a different question, right? There's action that's involved in that you have to take. But the potentiality, the option for it to happen comes mental first, then physical components inside at the cellular level after that. So yeah, amazing. So it's interesting. I want to go back to your definitions of trauma, because what I love about that is I think there's so many words that we layer and load with judgment and emotions in this, right? Like I'll use one as like selfish, right? And I'll work with my clients a lot of like, you've got to get really selfish. And their first reaction to that is to recoil, because it's like, no, selfish is bad. It's ugly, and selfish. It's like, no, selfish means that what you're putting self first. And in this scenario, if you don't put yourself first in the variety of ways, you're not going to have anything left to care for other people, right? Like your family. And so the analogy I use is like, you give to charity after your bills are paid, or else everybody ends up homeless, right? And emotionally, it's the exact same way. So I like how you flip that with trauma. So an emotional seeding that takes place during a thought that comes seeded at a time of heightened emotion. Is that what you? Yeah.
So or heightened intensity, because sometimes if you're like in a traumatic scenario, it's not just emotion. You're like physically being injured. So it's some key seed idea that happens that like gets planted at a time of physiological and emotional intensity.
Gotcha. Which would explain, on a positive side, the people, those classic like stuck in high school people, right? Like the Uncle Rico character, like I would have won state. I would have, you know what I mean? It's like, because it
really is like it becomes an identity in a way.
Right. And it would also explain how somebody can go through something that another person would deem traumatic, and that person's fine. They're like, no, I'm good, right? Because there was potential for it to seed, it didn't grow, it didn't take root, right? It was just potential.
So then if we look at it from like the opioid perspective, right? So there's pharmacological trauma, so to speak, in that like the idea that I need this painkiller in order to be able to manage pain. When pain is a production of the brain, it's not a production of the body. And people don't understand what pain is. Even doctors don't understand what pain is. They're not trained in that. Some of the textbooks even now still talk about pain receptors in the system, which there aren't any. There's no such thing. And so thanks to Descartes way back in the day. Some things.
I hurt, therefore I am. Is that what you're saying?
I hurt, therefore I. And so like there's the seed idea that I need this in order to survive. And that's planted at a time when their body is, if that same person had been given that idea, look, you just take this whenever you need it and it'll help you with the pain. That idea wouldn't have been planted if it happened at a time when they felt absolutely amazing, bursting with this on the inside out. They'd just come out of the best massage ever. And then you're like, dude, when you're in pain, take this. And they'd be like, okay, thanks. I'm good. And so the well-being on the inside of the system is actually what determines whether you become traumatizable or not. And in the 12-step meetings, I went in an emotionally raw state. Now here I'm going to out myself to the world as a guy who can't stop watching people have sex online. And And so I'm already emotionally raw. And then the idea comes, I'm an addict.
So it's almost like being suggestible.
Yeah, you're in a hypnotically suggestible state. Anytime you're opening yourself up to an authority, when you're like, I don't have the answer, let me see the answer out there. Whatever answer comes, you're automatically suggestible. And in that case, it's like 12-step trauma. I came and I went in a human being struggling and I walked out an addict.
Gotcha. Or I went into the church an unformed being and I came out a convert or a believer, right?
Yeah.
Same process. Yeah. So why, for you in particular, why do you think that that suggestibility was able to take root? Why do you think those messages got in and it did stick for you personally?
I think that my upbringing in religion was really big because these 12-step meetings are religiously oriented, and the Mormon faith actually had their own version of 12-step meetings that were based on Bill W's. Like there have been so many other spinoffs. And so like I had the inherent trust that the authorities of the church who had created this program were speaking the truth. And so then I go in and then I'm suggesting all these things, and then it landed really well. And it was the only answer I had. I tried everything else, and it was easier for me to believe that I had a disease called an addiction, than for me to like contemplate what I already believed underneath, which is there is something fatally wrong with me. I'm literally defective. And so it was actually easier for me to accept the idea of addiction, because it allowed me to not have to deal with the initial idea that I'd been carrying, which isn't true, but I certainly felt true, which is that there's something wrong with me. That was harder to hold. So addiction almost became in some ways a distraction for me, like a way to outsource and to look away from the real me that I was carrying.
I was just going to say it's a nice way to externalize the problem, right? Versus, like you said, fundamentally flawed. It's it's a series of behaviors that have taken root. It happened outside of me, so I can probably fix it outside of me without even having to look at all this big scary stuff that may be in the DNA, that may be more foundational.
It's still happening. Like even saying it's DNA's fault or genetics fault is a way of outsourcing the problem and giving away the ability to take action.